All right. Hey, you guys.
All right, hey
Hello.
everyone.
See y'all again. Okay, so we are going to start discussing the awesome things that we read about this week. The first thing that I thought we could talk about is let's start with the chapter in critical comprehension, um, confronting bias, which I really found interesting because, well, I have a lot of, you guys know, you've been with me, what, a few times. I've got opinions about everything, but it was just really, really interesting because to think of and to reflect on bias when you think you don't have it, you probably
Right.
do. And
hmm
that was, I think, the most, I don't know, the striking thing that really resonated with me is like a lot of times, what we think is just normal is actually bias that we've kind of accumulated from our society and from
Absolutely.
what's around us.
Absolutely. Yeah, I liked that on that page 153 where it had all the different types of bias. And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that there were that many. But
Right?
it was actually
hmm
kind of like, I don't know, it was kind of eye-opening. I forgot which one it was, but I know I helped out recently, our admin at a job fair recently, and a lady came up. She wasn't using sign language, but you could tell that she had that deaf, that she was deaf. And I know that they just kind of like put her like in the pile of not really interested. And it was just like before they even like really even gave her half of a chance of maybe she's like a wonderful phenomenal teacher. But and because one of them in here was bias against those, nonverbal bias, I think. Um so anyway, it was just very eye-opening how many, it's not just on race or gender, it can be, there's many different types of bias.
Yeah, I think you can be biased against anything, really.
And I,
Right.
for me, it's human nature, right? Like I feel like when we're children, we we tend to want to be the same. We don't want to be different. And so we
Right.
develop these biases according to what we see in society. And I liked how they broke it down because I think, they talk about the role of the teacher is to bring awareness to it and then allow the children to understand that these biases exist and how to overcome those, how we
Right.
play a specific role in that. So I did like that, like like for us to say, oh, it's wrong for you to have a bias. No, it's human nature, but what we
Right.
should do is try to overcome it once we're aware of it. And I
Absolutely.
appreciated that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It brings to mind the quote, when you know better, do better,
Yes.
Yes.
and so
That's really good, appropriate.
yeah. So I guess we can start with the little questions that'll help guide us, I guess. But so as teachers, like how do we help students spot bias and then think critically? And I don't know, what are
I think,
some good ways to get them to question, I guess, different perspectives? It's a whole thing, right?
well, I think for like high school, it's a little easier because we're actually reading novels. We're actually
Hey guys,
talking
I'm
about
sorry. I
those
gotta go
things.
help my dog with something real quick. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Oh, sorry,
Okay.
sorry, sorry.
No
It's
problem.
okay. Um, and so I'll give, should we wait or?
No, give me
Oh, you can hear me? Okay. So we're reading The Great Gatsby, and we're talking about the character of Tom Buchanan. And I don't know if you remember that book from high school, but he is literally sitting at dinner and talking about how he has just read this book called Rise of the Colored Empire. And the book talks about how if we don't try to fight back against colored people, that the white race will be utterly submerged. And so my kids are reading it and
Oh, jeez.
they're like, I can't believe he just said that.
Right.
And the other kids are like, what are you talking about? It goes over their head. So I bring it to attention. I'm like, what kind of person is Tom Buchanan? And the thing the kids realize is he's racist. And so then they start understanding the nuances of his characterization
Yeah.
as the book goes along. So like that happened last week. This week today, he hits his mistress, slaps her in the face and breaks her nose. So it's like not only is he racist, but he beats women. And so so the
Oh
kids are
my
catching on
gosh.
and we're talking about these things in class. And so I think, like when we talk about him, one of the things we that the kids are saying is he's rich, and so he thinks he's entitled. So when he hits his mistress, who's low class, he doesn't think twice about it. He already has this bias against poor people that he can treat her like an object. Whereas his wife, who is from the upper class, he can't treat her like an object because of that bias. So we talk about those things from the novels that we read. Already. I don't know about the elementary school, like what kind of books y'all are allowed to read, but for us, it's already implicit in the things that we read.
Well, and I think that's interesting because The Great Gatsby and Tom, like that's blatant. But
Hmm.
when you have books at the elementary level, it's not as cut and dry, I don't think.
Hmm.
Like, for instance, the books, I'm thinking back to last week with Max and Ruby. Like when my kids were little, they loved Max and Ruby. I didn't think anything of Max and Ruby, and but when you break it down and you really start to think about it, obviously there's some stereotypes, there's some biases that are going
Hmm.
on there. So I don't know. And in the readings this week too, there were just there were some mentions, I guess, of different things that I just hadn't thought of, even though you're reading to
Well,
read them.
they did say that there seemed to be a lack of strong female characters. And I don't know what period they're referring to because I
Uh-huh.
felt like when I grew up, and this was the 80s and 90s, I didn't feel like that was the case. Like I remember
See,
Ramona
same.
Quimby was pretty strong. I remembered
Yeah,
Nancy Drew was pretty strong.
right.
The Boxcar Children, there was a sister in there that was strong. So so I
Even
didn't know if
Green
like they were
Gables
talking
was
about,
strong.
huh?
Even Anne of Green Gables was
Was
strong.
strong. So, and Island of the Blue Dolphins, which was my favorite book in
Yes.
fourth grade. A girl who lives alone after her brother dies and literally lives on an island by herself for 20 something years.
Okay.
I didn't, I
Talking.
didn't get that sense growing up that there were not strong female
Right.
characters. I felt like there were, at least in my experience, plenty.
Mhm.
I can't really remember too many characters that were strong, to be honest. Maybe Peter Hatchett from Tales from a Fourth Grade Nothing and the kid in Where the Red Fern Grows, but I don't really remember being inundated with only
Mm-mm.
a strong male protagonist.
Yeah,
I
I didn't
agree.
either. My mom helped me because I was an avid, just read all the time. And she got me into like, they were clean, of course, but like I loved history. So like the historical stuff, but for teens, But so I read a lot of stuff where, it was the girl that was the lead. And so yeah, I really didn't find that myself growing up either.
So I don't get the sense that it comes from books necessarily. I get the sense more it comes from society.
I agree.
Yes.
Um,
I
Yes.
agree.
um,
Because now I was raised in it was a very biased home. It was strictly very religious. It was very, um, my dad was from Canada, my mom was from California. It was just, and they were old school, like because of the religion, I believe that it was just those old school values of the woman needs to be in the home and
Mm.
the man goes out to work and the woman does the laundry, and these are the things that she can do, but not any of those. And so that was one of those things that I faced growing up, realizing that, wait, no, I can also be strong. I don't have to do that. You know,
did you feel like you got that from books?
Oh no, 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 no. It
Yeah.
was from society for sure.
Okay.
It was absolutely. In fact, I remember in particular one time I was supposed to give a talk at church, or I was supposed to do something at church. I remember, and it was all about what do you want to do when you grow up. And I had all these ideas of what I wanted to do when I grew up, but my dad came down and said, "Oh no, you're not. You will say you want to be a mother." And I'm like, "Whoa,
Like,
yeah, it was
wow.
crazy." So I never got that from a book. In fact, I went to books to escape that.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
so that's what's interesting to me. Like we can talk about these books and how biased they are, but you know what? They saved me. by finding those strong females.
So I
And
think that
Okay.
just that just shows the importance of how we need to introduce these books to our
Yes.
children in the
yeah,
classroom so that they
yeah,
have an outlet. I don't have, I mean, my dad, there's a duality there, my mom and dad. So it's like they wanted me to like become a doctor, like the typical East Asian family. They wanted me to do well in life and be financially successful, but at the same time, my dad took me out in third grade and he's like, you're gonna have to cook for your husband, so we need to start teaching you, those kinds of things when I was growing up. So it was like a duality there. But I always felt like like a lot of like the female stuff didn't come from books. It came from him, it came from society.
yeah.
My husband teaches engineering at the high school level. So not at the high school that I'm at, but a nearby high school. And one of the things that he said is like when they get in groups, to build, like to design a project, to build it, he said that he didn't realize it, but once he started teaching, he realized that the tasks that are relegated to the girls in the group, and he said there usually tends to only be one or two because not too many sign up for engineering. He's like the boys are asking the girls to do the scrapbooking part of the project,
Oh, interesting.
like keeping the notes and like scrapbooking like the plan and all that. But the boys are the ones who are designing it. They're the ones cutting the pieces and they're the ones putting it together. And he's like,
Mm.
and he's like, these biases are there, and I have to tell them no. She's not gonna just sit there and like take your notes and scrapbook for you. She's gonna help design it too. And
Good
I
for
think
him.
yeah, but I mean, like he said, he's like, I was never aware of that. That was happening
Hmm.
unconsciously in society until I started teaching, and now I have this microcosm of society in my classroom, and it's reflected in the choices that these kids make.
Right.
Interesting. Yeah, because I think that like you said, it's like those biases like I because when I was reading this, I was thinking about the reverse, how I know that it was, a lot of what our reading was centered on women could do anything too. But, like when I was growing up, men didn't become nurses, men didn't become teachers. I mean, not in like primary schools and stuff like that. So I think that, it's important. I when I had my classroom library, I consciously tried to put in books about girls being famous in sports or girls going into like I really love that movie, and I'm going to lose it now, about the women who helped with the space program back in the 50s or 60s. And I tried to do that because sometimes you will, get, it's more like you said, it's more the fighting the society stuff and trying to make sure that kids are open to a wide variety of things. So I agree with you, Lynn. I think we're more combating what society says that these kids can and cannot think of as far as gender or whatever.
And I'm seeing more men, like the elementary school my children go to. We have
Hmm.
male teachers at the elementary school level.
Yes.
It used to be they would only be at the high school, college, but now I'm seeing more that are doing elementary.
Yes.
And they are, well, I mean, my daughter's favorite teacher was last year a guy, and he was
Good.
just so gentle and so kind and so patient. So I definitely, I guess I never asked him how he felt about that, but but that has become more normalized, I feel like.
Yes, most definite.
Yeah, and I think I think that's important. That um that there are more males in elementary school.
Hmm.
Really, I mean, I love that. I
Well, I
more
think a lot of kids need that male influence, and
absolutely,
it just
absolutely.
helps,
Yeah.
And it goes back to like the books that they talk about, when that kid that took dance classes, I don't remember his name.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
Hey, I hate to interrupt you guys, but it's telling me that I only have 6 minutes left on my Zoom recording capabilities. Did you guys run into that?
no, I mean,
Mm.
Michelle.
No, I didn't, because did you set it up through University of Phoenix through the online thing, like
Uh-uh.
in with the
No, I
classroom?
think it's they're mine. Eey.
I
Okay.
wonder if you'll be able to pick it up again, like if it cuts you off, if you'll be able
I
to
don't
like
know. Okay, wait, hold on. Maybe I can just really quickly grab. I'll just if I'm looking over
If I
here,
could extend the time, maybe?
I'm just gonna have to pay for a month. It's fine. But I'm just gonna
Oh,
do this.
no.
I'm looking over here. That's why, because I don't want to lose this, because we're not starting over.
Okay. All right. But while she's doing that, let me find that book. I don't remember, but it was about a kid who dance lessons. Oh, Oliver Button is a sissy. About that mold, about how like he takes classes so the takes dance classes so all the kids think that he must be like like weak and whatnot. And like maybe he's homosexual because he is a dancer. So how this book opens up the idea that no, he's not. And I think, having more men in the elementary school would also help with that. So it's not seen as
Mhm.
like a job only for women, that there's more to that men can teach any level. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, good point.
And then one of the things I really liked about chapter 5 was their little chart, the breakdown of bias, because I had a hard time like trying to group these things. And then when they had that chart about like, hey, this is prejudice, this is bias, this is stereotypes, and this is racism, that progression that they gave really helped me envision it, especially the example they gave, girls are good sewers, and then girls are good sewers, but boys are not, and how it went through. And that really, really helped 100% for me.
Yeah, are you talking about the one that's on 156?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
helped me a lot because
absolutely.
I was like, well, what's the difference between prejudice and bias? Like they're
Mm-hmm.
so similar, but
Right.
so when they broke it down, it gave me an understanding. If you have a prejudice, then it develops into a bias, and then it could lead to a stereotype.
Yeah, that was good.
I
Good
really
point.
did. I really loved that. I'm glad that you brought that up because I often get confused of what is what and what makes what. So, that was definitely something that I learned. Wow.
I did too, and I think we just kind of use those words interchangeably,
Hmm.
and
Yeah,
whatnot.
when
So,
they are very distinct.
yes. And I do have a question for y'all. I am pretty locked in what I can teach at the high school level, like American Lit. I
Hmm.
mean, there's only so much we can do. So I did know the elementary, middle school, do y'all have more freedom in teaching what you want? Because we can ask, but there's not a lot
As
of freedom.
Okay.
freedom, well, our
What you
district has
teach.
not had a curriculum, so teachers have made their own, but that will change next year when we go to what's called arts and letters, which I was looking at today, and I'm very excited because arts and letters uses authentic text to read, I mean, to teach reading, and a lot of the books that are in our manual here are included in the curriculum.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
I was very excited because like even the one, oh, what was that one called? The one with the little boy that was on the bus and his grandma was teaching him about perspective. That's in there. Another one that we haven't talked about yet, fry bread. That so anyway, so I was really excited. But so yes, but I think they've had some freedom to use the literature they want, to use some of the materials they want. But being at a elementary level, you're not going to be able to talk about, like homosexuality. You're not going to be able to talk about things like that. But you've got some freedom to bring in books about stereotypes and bias and that kind of thing. Does that kind of answer your question, Lynn?
Yeah, I just didn't know. So it sounds like you kind of lightly tread it.
Yes. Yeah. The
Okay.
topics you have to like, there's no like no issues with teaching about segregation, teaching about racism, things like that. But yeah, you're gonna have to, especially with littles and respecting parents and that you're not gonna be able to just be open to any topic that we go over in this book. Like I'll
Okay.
tell you right now, there's one we haven't read about yet, but it's towards the back. It's about um, bias in the way people dress, and it's a book about a little boy who likes to dress up in his sister's. dresses. It's called Sparkle Boy. That would not fly. That would just not, especially I think too that Bartow County is more conservative. But I think there's other ways to deal with that. I mean, you can always talk about accepting others regardless of who they are, their choices. There's ways to address it, but there are some things that are kind of off limits I don't know. That's just for me. Diane, what do you think at your elementary level?
Oh, by the way, we have unlimited minutes now.
Oh, okay, thank you.
I had like a minute left. I was racing, but no, I agree. I think plus, it depends on society as well.
Hmm.
It depends on where your kids are from. Like what we are a kind of on the outskirts. I'm in Douglasville, but we're on the south side, so it's horse country out here. So it's not transient. Not a lot of things. And so I think it depends on who's in your class, what would be acceptable. Because like if I have
Yes.
a classroom and I read something, it might be definitely somebody was calling the principal the next day, as opposed to if
Yes.
I were in, I don't know, Atlanta and I read the same thing, it might be a different story. So
Hmm.
I think it's just knowing who your clientele are. And
Yes.
that's terrible because it's their bias, but at the same time, you can't really, if I go into a kindergarten classroom and I read, I don't even know what story it would be, but let's say it's a story about a child that has two dads or two moms. Like,
Yeah.
how is that going to be received? Well, it should be received great because there are kids who are living like that, but will it be?
Absolutely.
I don't know. And
Well, I can give you an example. Like we haven't done it since, but our kindergarten teachers every year used to do this little fun activity with the kids where they would hold a wedding for Q and U to teach kids that Q and U stay together. Well, the last time we did it a couple years ago, that blew up in our faces. It was on Facebook. The parents were all upset, and it was from both sides of opinions. It's like some were like, no, that wasn't right because you were using a boy and a girl, and that's not fair. And then others were like, well, we're not going to use two boys and two girls. And so we stopped doing it because I mean, up here in Bartow County, we couldn't even have a Q and U wedding to show kids a fun activity of Q and U. We stay together in reading. That's crazy.
hey,
But
wait a minute. Wait a minute. You just said Bartow. I think I know
yeah,
the principal. Possibly.
uh, you know my principal,
Possibly.
Miss Perry, Lizzie Perry.
No. So you may be at a different school.
Yeah.
But Bartow's small.
Yes. Yeah. We're
Oh,
spread out,
yeah.
but it's only 12 elementary schools.
Oh, you have
So,
12 elementary schools. Okay. See, I was thinking you were much smaller than that, which is one.
oh, you might be thinking about the city because Bartow, then we have Cartersville City Schools, which has only got
Okay.
one K through two, one three through five, one middle school, and one high school. Maybe
That's
that's
probably what I'm
just
thinking of. Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep. Okay.
And
Anyway, sorry.
I
Continue.
find that those smaller areas tend to be a little more strict in what they
Yeah.
allow also, whereas like if you have a bigger county, they tend to be more um less. Though my school, I feel like I mean we have an LGBTQ plus club and we have a multicultural literature class, but we do still have to be very, very careful
Okay.
and what we say. I mean, we have trans kids, we have bathrooms for
Hmm.
our trans kids, but they still tell us we have to be careful in what we say with the kids, just because
Okay.
parents will complain. Like one of my colleagues, she said about 5 years ago, she had a parent who complained about a book choice that she made for the class to read. And she went to the principal about it, and the principal, had her back. But she was like, she said it's not even a problematic book. It's just a book that maybe featured some stuff that the parent didn't necessarily agree with. I never asked because I wasn't there at the school at the time, but like for us, it's like we have a program in place but there's only so much freedom we can get because we still have to get approval for books that lie outside of what the curriculum says we can teach.
Okay. That yeah. Again, it's probably like you said, it's just going to depend from area to area and what parents will tolerate and not tolerate. But like I said, there's always a way around it. Like I said, you can always teach about stereotypes stereotyping or treating others with kindness and those type of things. So that's why I like the way that critical comprehension, our book runs the whole gamut of a whole bunch of different topics.
Agreed. Yeah. All right. So in an effort to move us along, let's because I think we could talk about this for a really long time. And I think that everything that we read really brings to surface a lot of the, just I don't know, new things to learn, but also some concerns that we have just in raising
Yes.
children and things like that. But the second thing was going to be the chapter that we were to read on gender, sexuality, and equity, which I think we kind of touched on a little bit actually. Just I think we talked about a lot of things, but um like for instance, how do kids books show traditional gender roles? I know we talked briefly about that. And then how do you shape here's a question. It's not kind of the one that's written, but we have these we have books and they show traditional genders and things like that, but
Hmm.
they're also getting that from home. They're getting that from what they see at church and in society and things like that. So when we're in the classroom, like what do we do about the gender norms? And how do we help kids break away from those stereotypes? And to be fair, the you could have five different kids in the classroom and each five would have different views and what they think is okay for a man or a girl and a boy to do and things like that. So, what are your thoughts?
Well, in chapter 5, there was one thing that kind of hit me of something I would have done if I was still in the classroom. And it was on page 106. And it talks about how it starts off at the bottom of 105. And it talks about it would be the sentence I underlined was this would be an intriguing critical response to a book in which to engage our students in order to examine gender balance of like substituting what would the story be like if the female was the lead instead of the male.
Uh-huh.
And and I thought that goes right along with at least where I taught in fourth and fifth grade standards, where you're having to compare and contrast different characters. So to me, you're doing something that isn't going to cause a ruckus, because basically what you're doing is you're just having students look at a book through a different point of view, through a different lens. So I thought that that was a good way to kind of handle that.
So at the high school level, we will actually assign like a writing assignments where the kid takes on the perspective of somebody different from the narrator. And
Hmm.
so I think that helps a lot too. So like for example, today we were talking about Jordan Baker in The Great Gatsby, who is a she dates a lot of men. She's a professional golfer, and she's like the complete opposite of Daisy Buchanan, who has chosen to forsake her happiness to marry Tom for money. They have a child who's barely mentioned, but she's super unhappy. She's a stay-at-home mom, but she trades money again for her happiness. And then you have Jordan. And so we talk about, like, why doesn't Daisy do what Jordan did? And the guys and the girls all say, well, maybe a lot of it has to do with fear. Like she's never had to go and get a job. She's never done these things and she's worried, how am I going to support this child? How am I going to like work in the world? So it's a safer option for her to stay in that gender, role of being subservient to her husband, staying at home because it's comfortable versus you have this character who has gone out there and has made a career, albeit she does cheat in one of the competitions, but albeit she does go and like tries to do something that's outside of that norm, even for that time period. So I think for us, like the way we broach it is just to make sure that we address these nuances and sometimes having them see the perspective of a different character helps them understand. Like you can judge Daisy and not like her, but you can have to have empathy for her and the
Mm,
situation she's in because we all know what it feels like to be fearful.
interesting. That's a good point. I like that.
Yeah, no, that is a good point. Hmm.
I know not to go too much back into um, critical comprehension, but one thing that had stood out to me, um, I guess that maybe kind of shows the importance of making sure kids get broad perspective is it said on page 159, children are not too young to have these conversations because they are not too young to cause the harm. And that kind of stood out to me. That and then it related to what chapter 5 was talking about. There was one thing I had underlined in there too that talked about what they read about and see in illustrations has a strong impact on their own identity if they are not exposed to varying betrayals. So I think that both of those just kind of show that the importance of having these conversations with children, not only for their own identity, but for the acceptance of the identities of those around them.
Where is that quote from? What page number again,
Okay, so the one in
Michelle?
critical comprehension on children not can cause the harm too is on page 159. And then the second one I read about children seeing and reading about themselves and their own identities is on page 104 in chapter 5.
Okay.
Uh,
I don't see the one on harm. I'm on page 159 because the one I'm looking at, I have the Kindle version, is talking
Okay.
about names.
oh, I can
So,
tell you it's in one, two, third. It's the last sentence in the third
oh,
paragraph.
I see it. I see it.
Yep.
All right, let me highlight it.
And that's
Okay.
yeah, okay, and that was in response or in regards to name bias, which
Yes, that.
which is interesting too. And I know that we should probably move along and not stay in here, but that is huge to try to get their names right. And so like I don't know, I guess what resonated with me is just learn the kid's name. And if you don't know, ask. And because
Mm-hmm.
I've witnessed teachers who don't ask and they just try. I mean, I am in no way going to think that I know how to pronounce everything because let me tell you, there are some interesting spellings out there. So, but just ask. Just
Yeah.
Yeah, I know we don't want to get hung up, but I'm sure that she'll be fine with this if we
I
kind of
think
talk
she'll
about
be okay.
lesson 2. I did this today with my project I'm doing with my ESOL kids
Uh-huh.
on helping them pick a book that kind of has their identity that they can relate to.
Yeah.
And well, I've been finding that the kids have been really struggling. And I think it's a lot to do with the fact that kids kind of want to assimilate, right? And they don't want to stand out. And so I'm asking them to stand out, figure out what makes you different, what makes you unique and special. And they're kind of fighting that. So today, when I read this one today, it was on using the book Alma, Racial Bias Through Naming Practices. Well, a couple of the kids had already talked about being upset when people don't pronounce their name right. So I was like, okay, well, let's try this today. So we even did that. If you look on page 167, I made them the little book, and instead of using Alma, I used the naming jar because that is very specific about the girl who's trying to Americanize and not use her own name. And I was trying to kind of relate that to them of it's okay to be special. It's okay to stand out. And so I did that little book, that mini notebook for them, but I typed in like all those little questions, like who selected your name? How was your name chosen? And so it really opened them up. And all of a sudden they were like, I don't like it when, when kids laugh at me or I don't, and then they started branching off to, I remember now being 5 years old and not knowing what to do. And it really opened them up. And now the kids were like, a couple of the kids even changed the book they were going to pick, which was really good because one just wanted to do something on American football. And I'm like, yeah, but is that who you are? It reminded me one time I was working with a bunch of second graders during my student teaching, and I was teaching a poetry unit. And these kids were really getting into writing these deep poems about family divorce and loved ones dying. And then there was this one little boy who wrote about vanilla ice cream. And I was like, is vanilla ice cream, is that really what's in your heart? And he was like, yeah, because I don't like chocolate and strawberry. And so, it really helped that doing that lesson too, it just triggered something with the kids. And they really started this good deep conversation. And then they were like, I'm not going to do the one on the dinosaur. I'm going to do the one on the name book. And I was like, great, great. So because I think our names are so personal, doing that lesson with them and having them reflect on their names, that really just targeted for them an opening for them to express their feelings and how they've been treated over their names.
Hmm.
I
Well,
agree. It reminds me of just really quickly when I taught pre-K, and we would start out with one of our very first books that we would share is Chrysanthemum.
Mm,
Just how she was embarrassed by her name, but in the end, she realized how unique it was. So, I mean, it's definitely a thing. But yeah, thank you for sharing that because I think that's amazing that you did that. It just reminded me of Chrysanthemum.
yeah. And I think names transcend culture. It's also like it's identity,
Mhm.
and that's
yes.
important to who we are. So even if you're no, you don't have a foreign sounding name, maybe you have an old fashioned name, like it's still gonna affect you, I feel like the same way. Like
Yes.
if your name, like if you think if Hermione Granger was a real person,
Yes.
you know, like how much she would have struggled with that name when she had to introduce herself to people, because people are gonna call her Hermie One or Hermione or
Right.
When I
Right.
first read Harry Potter, I'd never seen that name before, and it kind of, how like if you don't say it out loud and you've never heard it, you don't know. Man, when I saw the movie, I was like, oh, I was way off.
Yeah, I think we all thought that. We all thought
Oh
that.
yeah.
But
There's
like
a lot
my
of things we were like way off.
my name is pretty simple. Yeah, it's not even pronounced Lynn. It's Lynn. But I think for me, I don't
Say it again.
expect Lynn.
Lin-
It's very
Lynn.
short.
Yeah,
Um,
that's so neat, though. I love that. Anyways,
but
continue. But
but
go
I
ahead.
don't expect people to get that. And I think because I tend to be more forgiving, right? Because like there are Vietnamese names where I knew a girl named Dung.
Oh,
And
okay.
it's spelled D-U-N-G because in Vietnamese we have two D's,
Oh,
the hard D and the soft D. The soft D is not pronounced like a Y, and the hard D has a line in it. And so
Oh,
her name is Mi Yung. So it's spelled M-Y space D-U-N-G. So in English, obviously it doesn't mean beautiful. But I mean, so she would go
oh,
by an American name, and I teach Esau, and a lot of these kids, like for them they have Vietnamese names, but they tell me it's just easier for them to pick up an American name because it's too much of a struggle. So they'll go like Hal goes by Henry. Um, Lin, I have a Lynn in my class. She goes by Emma, and I have a Mi Ying that goes by a Jenna. So it's like they pick American names just because it's easier.
easier. And
Um,
you have to respect their choice on that too. You know, if they
I
don't want to fight the battle all the time.
yeah, and they're recent immigrants. I find that the second generation because they feel like they've lost a sense of like their identity, they tend to cling more towards their traditional names than the kids who are like, I guess, strong and confident in their identity and of their culture because they grew up in
Okay.
it or they were raised in it. Like I don't have a problem because I my parents were, I grew up in two separate worlds, Vietnamese at home, American outside. So I don't have an issue with that, but I find that like the children who didn't have that experience where they were born here tend to cling on to that part of their identity because they feel like they missed out on that more.
Interesting.
that is really interesting. And thank you for bringing that up because that's something that I don't, you know, eh, that we don't have, right?
Hmm. I
So,
mean,
and I think
I
that,
my kids are half white, and so I think, by the time I have great grandchildren, like they're gonna be so immersed that they'll know that yes, they have Vietnamese roots, but I don't think that, and it's natural. Like they're gonna
right,
understand that, like,
right,
hey, it's just like the Greeks, the Irish, the 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 Italians, all those people that came here, it's not like anybody identifies that as much. It's we're all that melting pot. So I think that will inevitably naturally happen. But until then, I feel like it is important for us to recognize that they are that's a part of their identity.
yeah, yeah.
Good point.
That's a really good point. Um, so one of the things that I think, and I think we touched on it, but I just have it here in front of us, but sexuality in children's books, I mean, that's always really, really tough. But I think that just goes back to the whole, you know, making sure that everybody's family is represented regardless of how it is, or making sure that they understand that who they are is important and it can be unique, and that doesn't, just a lot of times though there's a lot of bias against both of those things,
Hmm.
Yes.
you know, um, about
Well,
not, especially, and I find this, I'm not from the South. So one of the things that I've noticed down here is very much rooted in Christianity.
hmm.
Hmm.
And so that tends to bleed over into school. It just does. And so I think a lot of that affects the bias that exists. And also it, I think, affects the people who tend to not think that way, that they keep it quiet, that they're not
and
as likely to share.
and it affects the books that are placed in the
That's what, and that's,
library.
and that was my point. It's a hard, like, I don't want to come out and just like blah, because, I don't want to offend anyone, but at the same time, it affects the books that are in the library, the books that are in the classroom. It affects the conversations that we have. It affects the kids' comments when something like that is shared. And so, I mean, it opens up the whole, you know,
Yeah,
Well,
I
kind
think.
of to pull it into that article that we had to read, exploring equity issues. I
yes,
mean, that's what
let's
I
pay
wrote
attention to
across
that.
the top. I was like, when it was talking about part two, what can we do?
Yeah,
Um, I wrote across the top that this isn't always a child problem, but a parent problem.
that's what
You
Hmm.
I,
know,
it's an adult problem.
and for example, every board meeting, we've got this one set of parents that come in wanting with a new set of books that they want banned,
Yeah.
bringing it back to that. Luckily, the school board is constantly fighting that, which is good, because I believe if you want to tell your child you want to ban a book for your personal child, that's fine, but you shouldn't be doing
That's
that
for
for
everybody.
everybody.
And
Yeah.
you know, that is exactly true. So, like, I have a friend that I grew up with. We went to high school together. We have children. The two girls are my oldest, and her oldest are great friends. She will not let her child read Twilight. I let my child read Twilight. And I have explicitly told my child that is not a healthy relationship. So when you read about Edward Cullen standing
Right.
outside her window, staring at her as she sleeps, I'm like, you have to understand this is fiction. This is fake. It's for entertainment. But if a man does that to you, that is not healthy. If a woman does that to you, it's not
Never
healthy.
thought of that because
I
I
mean,
was Team
she's standing
Edward.
out there staring at her sleeping, and they're not even, it's just
Yeah.
weird. And so like these are conversations I have with my children. Now, I don't know why Melanie doesn't allow her children to read those things. I
Yeah.
have that philosophy because my parents didn't read English, so they would buy books from the thrift store to help me learn English. So I in elementary school, I was reading adult books, and I find that that helped me learn English, but it also helped me understand different perspectives.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so and like, I'm not saying she's a bad mom. She lets her children read, but I think she wants to make sure that it's age appropriate. But we are seeing more and more of, like, especially not in Gwinnett, but around the surrounding areas, these parents who go to board meetings and have successfully gotten these books out. And the teachers are mad. And we're like, if you don't want your child to read it, tell them no. Like, that is a
Right.
parenting issue.
Right.
That
Right.
is not a teacher
Yeah.
issue.
Right.
But
I
they want to make it so that everyone follows their philosophy.
And it's so sad, because then where does it stop? Like, I remember one time, during my bachelor's program, having to do in one of my literacy classes a report on a banned book. And do you know that Dr. Seuss's The Lorax at one time was banned in California because it was anti, tree. And that, the lumber business is huge. And so it's like, where do we stop? And it's just a slippery slope when we start doing that. And it
yeah.
should be up to parents, not up to school boards, not up to any other parents. So, and again, when we start doing that, then we start limiting what we can expose kids to, which goes in contrary to everything we're learning about, is exposing kids to different points of view.
Mhm.
And I think that segues nicely into Starfish
I think
because
so
Yeah.
we have a
too. It's
parent
great.
who
Yeah.
is who is the epitome of like bias and causing childhood trauma
Oh my
and not
Yes.
gosh,
recognizing
y'all.
it.
Y'all, this book, I'm not gonna lie. I am not gonna lie. There are way too many kids who live this life.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it breaks my heart. Breaks my heart.
What stood out to me in this book is when you compare it to like Rain, it regardless of whether you're talking about sexual abuse, physical abuse, or emotional abuse,
Yeah.
it is still destructive.
It's
Like, she still needed therapy just as much as the girls in Rain did.
hmm
Or, it's just sad that like you said, there's parents out there. I guess you're supposed to think about like the different voices, and I would love to have known what was the mom's trauma, what was the mom's issue that she was so. I would have liked to hear her voice.
it's
Why were you so hard on your daughter?
But
I
why do these moms exist?
I
Yes,
thought
because
it
they
was
do.
societal because
That
my mom was like that. My mom was very like, oh, I mean, like I grew up in America, so I tended to be bigger, whereas like she grew up in a country where most the girls and even in our culture are very thin. And so like I related with that a lot, just feeling
Mm,
like oh, not being skinny enough and hearing my mom say these things to me. My mom was not that bad though. She didn't like try to take food away and do all those things. So I think, like hers is just more of words, like what, like you're chubby, you need to probably eat less, that kind of stuff. But she wasn't like as regimented as this. And it's funny you bring up Rain because like even as poor and alcoholic as that father was, I felt like he was not as bad of a parent to uh
oh,
to the main character as this mother who sounds like she's middle class, educated
right.
to this child, her own child, and not recognizing those biases, those prejudices, and the harm that she was causing her child, even as a woman from middle class and who is educated.
Absolutely. And I
though.
said Rain, but I think I was also thinking about fighting words too. The,
Yeah,
the characters in fighting words too.
yeah.
But yeah, this mom was a piece of work. I was like, there were so many times I was like,
I know, but I wonder if it's generational because you just said that your mom was that way, right? My mom, my dad. I mean, I wasn't allowed to wear shorts my entire school, not because of religion, but because they said my legs were too fat and that
oh,
I would be bullied. And so they would make me walk and they would make me do this and that. And like it was a whole thing. And I don't know if maybe I don't maybe
I
it
know
was
for sure for me
no.
it was cultural. It's not generational.
Okay.
I
Well,
mean, you
maybe
have to understand most women in Vietnam, I don't know about now, but when she was growing up, they were very thin.
okay.
Even in the 90s when we came over and we lived, I was probably one of the bigger Vietnamese girls at my church. My best friend was like 90 pounds. I think I was 110. So not like
oh my gosh.
big,
I
but
mean,
But you were
like in
still tiny.
comparison to the rest of the 90-pound girls who were all my age, I was considered big. And so I think that it was cultural and
Yeah,
yeah, I
like
can see that.
a lot of East Asian women want to be pale, small, um, and thin. So that's our standard of beauty. And so
right.
she I think that was cultural for her to impress it upon me. But I felt like this mom went way overboard.
Oh
Just
my gosh,
Oh,
yes.
totally.
absolutely. And the dad didn't even stand up. I mean, he said a couple things here and there, but why didn't he like
Do you
stop
think he
her?
do you think he understood it as well as
I
I
think the
No.
mean,
mom did a lot of things behind his back. That became clear like towards the end when he was like really took a firm stand when he found out that she was taking her to the doctor for uh, gastric bypass surgery. And remember, that's the point where he cried, like, I'm so sorry, when he took her to the doctor to find a good doctor and saw what his daughter was going through when she would go, like the nurse, tisk tisk when she's on the scale. And, I think he was kind of blind to what, even though he was protected, he was blind to the full extent of what she was
yeah, that's what
facing.
I thought too, that
Fair.
he was blind to the full extent of how the impact of what this mother was doing
And
to her
Yes.
child.
here lately, I've gotten really into documentaries, and I feel like the more I watch, it's very it just it relates so much to this. Like some of the moms are real kind of crazy, and the
Yeah.
just don't understand to the full extent that what they're doing to their kids or what they did do or whatever it may be. So I think that you're probably right. I mean, so her safe spot was the pool, and which is interesting to me because that
Right?
has not been my safe spot.
No, not wearing
Not
a
going
bathing
anywhere
suit.
near a pool. So
No.
like my fat girl rules did not include a pool. I wouldn't go in.
Right.
So that was interesting to me, and though it worked with the poetry and the stanzas and things like that, and she used words that had to deal with water and this and that, I just thought it was interesting. That was an interesting choice, and I
Yes.
wonder what the author was thinking to do.
Unless it was because it was her personal pool, not going to a community pool.
Yeah, I
And
thought it
that
was a
might be
personal
true.
pool.
I didn't have a personal pool, so maybe it would have been. I don't know.
Yeah. I thought it made like her sense of like that it was like weight, it made her feel weightless, like weight didn't matter in her
Yeah.
personal pool where she wasn't being judged, where she didn't have to worry
Yeah.
about people. So I felt like it was more of like just the sense of freeness that she didn't have to worry about her weight in her own private pool.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, but for what you're saying, Diane, she wouldn't even swim with her friends.
Right.
They had to really prove their trustworthiness before she would even
Hmm.
invite that in to
Right.
them for to swim.
Right.
And I think it's she's gonna struggle with this for the rest of her life
Oh,
because of
yeah.
the foundation that her mom has laid. It's funny because you remember we talked about Humans of New York blog. There is one
Yes.
just like that. It was about a brother who said he started off the story about she was 9, talking about his sister,
Mhm.
and it was a comment by somebody in her class that she had fat legs. And so he said the first time his sister was hospitalized when she was 14. So,
Oh, wow.
but he didn't know at the time that it was a comment from that. All he knew is one day she stopped eating, and then she stopped eating. And it got to the point where her parents begged her to eat. And and then over time she's she became hospitalized.
Mhm.
And now she sees a therapist, and they found out through the, like from her and the therapist that it started when she was 9 years old from a boy
Mm,
who told her that. And so I can't imagine if one innocent child, making a comment like that unthinkingly, that it caused irreparable harm, how much this mother must have, like just changed her
yes.
child for the worse.
Well, that goes back to that what we talked about with the book, that's why we have to talk to these children about these things because they're not too young to cause harm. I'm sure that 9-year-old didn't mean to inflict that type of pain on her, but it can happen. I just something that hit me too, that it's on page 141. It was the part called the poem called "Ignored Out of Existence," where she's talking about how her dad calls the school, and then the mean girls, Marissa and Courtney, they start ignoring her. And she talks about how at first she thinks that being ignored is better, but then she starts feeling like, well, now people are just looking right through her, like she doesn't even matter. And it reminded me of a quote I read once, and you guys might be aware of it too, where it talked about how the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference, because at least hate is a feeling where indifference has no emotion. It's not attached to anything. And so that came to my mind when, she was struggling with that of what's better, being tortured and bullied or being ignored. She had the full gamut of everything thrown at her. That's for sure.
For
And I
sure.
liked how they pulled out, like her sister called by name when we talk about the importance of names. When her sister didn't call her Splash and called her Ellie, how meaningful that was. So that really drew me into that lesson. Like, oh wow, like it doesn't have to be just cultural. It can just be something as simple as this is my name. Can you call me that?
Right.
And so that
Right.
was really sweet.
Yeah.
Because Splash was not meant to be endearing
No, it was
at all.
right. And that's so, I mean, I just feel, I feel for her so much. The character is just but I mean, again, think it's just we see it all around us, and
And
it's not
then,
necessarily
yeah,
like that. It's just I mean, okay, so I have to really quickly. I don't know if you guys listen to the Lumineers, but that is one of my very favorite lines from one of their songs. Is the opposite of love is indifference.
difference.
Yes.
And that was, I think, the first time I ever heard that song was the first time I ever thought about that. Anyway, so
Mm.
I love that you brought that up. So I just had to about
And
it.
another thing she brought up that I really liked was she says it's unknown how many students' lives librarians have saved by welcoming loners at lunch. And then, like putting aside that book for Ellie. So it was like drawing in all the things that we've talked about, how these books, you can find solace in these books and it's a safe space for these kids.
Agreed.
Um,
And teachers. And
and
I know this was a librarian, but the safety of a teacher, like I'm sure you guys have many experiences too where we're the safe place. School is the
Mhm.
safe place.
Right.
and
Exactly.
So,
And her parents modeled it, right? Because Liam is saying stuff, her brother, to her in front of
Yes.
them, and they don't address it.
Don't say
right.
Like
anything.
they don't say anything, so they contribute to that whole circle
Acceptance. Yeah, of how she's
acceptance.
treated. Yeah.
So I mean, because I was like, I cannot believe that that was allowed. Like,
Yeah.
when a kid says something to another kid in my class, I address it. I'm like,
Yes.
Hmm.
Same.
and they're like,
Oh,
oh,
when I was
well, we're
growing
just
up,
playing.
Mm,
we were disciplined if my sister and I even said shut up to each other, let alone a remark like
Yeah.
Liam was making to her.
right.
Yeah, and I mean, like, like that's something I feel like they should have addressed. Like, the teacher, address if a kid, I mean, I'll have a kid say, well, that's stupid. I'm like, no, you better apologize. We are not using that
Yep.
word. I don't care how old you are. And they will, because they know I will write them up. And they will, and they won't do it again. Because and it's gotten to the point where I'll give them the stink eye and they're like, I'm sorry. So like the
Yeah.
parents, to me, two people, the father's a psychiatrist. I mean, these are things like, I'm
Right.
like, why do you not know? But I think, again, I like that they portrayed the family that way, just to show you, just because you're middle class and you're educated does not mean you are free from bias, from prejudice, from
Right. No
those
one's above
things.
it.
Absolutely.
No one's above it. Yeah. And I think with that, unless we have anything, do we have anything else we want to say? We've had a lot to say, and I think we could continue talking for a long time about the different things because it is so it hits home.
Hmm.
Yes.
And
The,
I think that was the biggest thing I took away from this was just be aware.
Be aware, yes. Oh, I will say I like your fourth question. The book is written in verse instead of traditional prose. How
Uh,
did this style affect your reading experience? Did it make Ellie's emotions feel more powerful? I will say this is my first um book in verse. I've never really, I mean, I enjoy wordiness because, you called me the English guru. I'm just like, that's probably true. Um, but like I really enjoyed it because I don't read poetry for fun, but I felt like the story was so powerful because it used so few words. And I know as a writer myself that she had to be very conscious about what words she used. And in fact, I just bought the book because she had Dr. Scullin had a book of lists of like books in verse, and the last one was about like a Vietnamese refugee
yeah.
who was lived through the fall of the Vietnam, Saigon.
Isn't that Esperanza Rising? Is that the
No,
same?
I don't remember what it was, In and Out or something like that, but I just
Oh,
bought it
yes.
on
I'm sorry. It
Amazon.
is In and Out. In and Out. You're
Yeah.
right.
So
Yeah.
I just bought it because I'm like, I want to read it.
Yeah.
Because I enjoyed this so much and that won the Newbery Award. So I bought it off of Amazon. I've never heard of it at all. Ironically, because like I know of a lot of books just because the Vietnamese community and the Asian American community, like we'll post stuff on like social media and all that, but nobody has listed that.
That's
So
well,
I
I
will,
know that one of the favorite books in eighth grade is The Crossover, and that is
okay.
all in.
And you enjoyed it too?
Yeah, it's great, but it does take a minute to get used to reading it that way.
Okay.
What I'm saying, like they're just it took me a few pages to kind of get the rhythm of how it was going, you know,
Yes.
because
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm not the English, I'm not the English guru. So I mean, I like to read, but it's usually in chapter form, you know? Colleen Hoover. Yeah, things of that nature, real trash. So
Okay.
I
I did try to read Ugly Love. I could not handle it, so
I
you didn't
like reading
like that
poetry,
one.
so I did enjoy I did enjoy this genre just because I do like reading poetry. But like what you were saying, Lynn, what you earlier about how you have to be precise with your words and all that. I really learned a lot by that a resource that Dr. Scullin had us read about why poetry or lyrical writing is important for kids to come to understand. And but I like it too because as a reading teacher, I found that poetry could sometimes be easier for kids when they
Mhm.
were striving or
Mhm.
struggling readers. It's easier for them because there's not as much big paragraphs and this and that, and they can focus on a one stanza at a time and not have so many words. So I found that to be very true when I was working with my kids, with they're especially struggling at reading to read more like poetic kind of books like this. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed that 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 genre.
I did too. Um, all right. I think we should
I think that's
probably
it.
I think it is. I really enjoyed talking with you all about this. So thank you for bringing all of your ideas, and I will put them
Definitely.
down into the notes as much as I can. Um, and we'll go from there. I'll send that out to you in the next little bit. I have to get
All
it done
right.
before I take off. Because
Alrighty.
I have
Thank
to
you,
mention.
Diane. Thank you, Michelle. Y'all have a
Thank
good
you,
evening.
ladies. It
Thank
was good. I
All
really
right.
enjoyed this conversation.
Absolutely.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.